Hi everyone, this video is going to be a labour and delivery story for my oldest son, Levi. I'm talking off the top of my head. I haven't got any notes, so please bear with me. This is all from memory and he's nearly 7. But all of this really explains why I really don't want to have a caesarean section. After I had my daughter, Nikki, I fell pregnant about a month later. I didn't realise that I'd fallen pregnant again. The relationship I was in wasn't really that fantastic, and you know, it really wasn't planned for me. Well, I didn't plan to get pregnant again. But I did, and I remember losing Nikki in the January, and I fell pregnant the February, around, ironically, around Valentine's Day. But I didn't know for a few months, and I felt funny, I felt weird in my body, but I didn't know what it was, and I thought it's just because I've lost a baby and all the trauma that my body had been through and everything. And I remember sitting at my cousin's house one day, and she was in the kitchen. I was just sitting in the lounge, and this must have been March or April, and I said, oh, I just feel really woozy, and I've got this tickling feeling in the bottom of my stomach. And she just looked at me and says, Jo, you're pregnant. And I'm like, no, I'm not, I can't be. And she says, you are, you're pregnant. And she took me to the chemist and brought a pregnancy test, and we went back to her house, and I went in the toilet and I did this test, and I came out and I was like, oh, how am I going to tell my dad? How am I going to tell my dad? And she's like, I'm sure your dad will be fine. You've just got pregnant and lost them, and you know, I'm sure your dad will cope. And sorry, that was how I found out I was pregnant. I didn't tell my partner at the time straight away, because like I said, our relationship was a bit rocky, but I did eventually tell him, and he was happy with that. And you know, it was a case of let's see how this one goes, and that was in 2002. The pregnancy, I think for the whole pregnancy, throughout the whole pregnancy, I was just really happy to be pregnant. I took one day at a time, because you know, I wasn't sure what was going to happen or how my body would react to being pregnant or anything like that. And so it was literally a case of taking one day at a time. After I passed the 15-week mark, I think I started to relax a lot more. But I was still sceptical, because I knew that, you know, I could lose at any time. So I really, really enjoyed my pregnancy. I made the most of every moment of being pregnant with him. I was still a little bit naive in so much that I didn't look things up. I didn't concern myself with any pains or in your pelvic floor like that. And mine had slipped so that it was like that. And so every time I moved, I couldn't sit on the bed and swing my legs up. It was, I can't even explain it to it, but it was so painful to the point where I was on crutches, and had my family waist on my hand and foot, which was great. But anyway, that happened about that, and that lasted right up until 38 weeks, when it was completely, really unbearable, and I could barely move because of the pain. At that point, nobody had told me if you do pelvic floor exercises, it helps. Nobody told me that if you rested for, say, 24 hours, put yourself on bed rest, it would help. Like I said, I got pregnant about the February, and I didn't realise until about the April. In the July of that year, I was about 5 months pregnant. Hang on a minute. February, March, April, May, June, July. Yeah, I was about six months pregnant, about 5 or 6 months pregnant anyway. And I kept going into labour. I didn't realise at the time what it was, but I kept going into premature labour. And there was one particular day I was in absolute agony, and I called my parents home, and my older sister answered the phone, and she, I told her about the pains. Now, this particular sister, she was a midwife, and I told her about the pains, and she rushed round, leaving her kids at my mum and dad's house. She rushed round to mine, and she checked me over, and she called the ambulance, and she came up to the hospital with me, and she was absolutely, she was just absolutely hilarious. She kept trying to fix my hair, and she kept saying, you know, do I fix your hair? The paparazzi will be waiting outside the ambulance for you, and, you know, and then the ambulance driver was in a bit of shock because he didn't realise I was as old as I was. He said, you certainly don't look it. And my sister was like, oh, how old do you think I look then? And, you know, she was really playing around and, you know, having a joke. And then we got to hospital. And obviously a lot of the people, the staff at the hospital knew her because she was a midwife as well. And they were checking me over, and they asked her, do you want to check her? And she goes, no, I'm in sister mode at the moment. You carry on doing what you're doing. Anyway, they called the paediatrician to come and talk to me about what the baby might be like, being born that early, and, you know, the risks of having him that early, and blah, blah, blah. And I just kept saying, I'm not having him now. He's not coming out now. I'm not losing another child. And my sister held my hand, and she says, you know, just take some gas in there. It will calm you down. And I was like, I'm not taking the gas in there. I don't want the gas in there. And she said that it won't hurt you, and it certainly won't hurt the baby. And she said, just take the gas in there, take a deep breath and relax. And I remember looking at one of the staff members over here, and I felt my sister's grip loosen on my hand. And when I looked, she was sitting in the chair next to me. She was all like this. And then she just made a funny noise and relaxed. And I realised she died. And that was extremely traumatic, extremely painful, even to recall the memory like this is really hard. And she'd passed away then. And the rest of the whole of that time was a blur. But I was actually on the delivery suite. They were prepping me to deliver my baby, which would have been born early, and my sister passed away right there, up there. And it was a really hard time for the whole family. You know, I kept asking God, why me? Why did it have to happen with me there? It was just a whole traumatic situation, but that's a completely different story. Anyway, that happened in the July the 15th, 2002. That happened, and I immediately I stopped having the pains. Now my sister was 7 years older than me, and obviously we had siblings in between. But we'd always fought. You know, we were always fighting, like just fighting all the time. But we had this thing where, you know, she'd call me and say, have you got toothache? And I'd be like, yeah. And she's like, yeah, I can feel it, and I know it's not mine. Or I'd phone her and say, have you got a headache? Because I can feel a headache that isn't mine. And she'd be like, yeah, I've got a headache, whatever. And she'd describe it and I'd be like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm feeling. And I remember when she had her first child, and